ado, I'm going to hand over to each of our brilliant panelists that we have today for you to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves. So, John, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Hi, I'm John Miniotti, Director of Product Management here at Forte Group. And I've been in product and software development, typically with high growth, often new to the world products. And what my interest in is the scaling and of new teams that come together and making sure that as the team scales, we're also focusing on the business value that we're building. Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you. Great to have you. Next, Fiona.
Hi, I'm Fiona Hobbs. I'm the CTPO, so the Chief Technology and Product Officer at 3T Digital. 3T are a global training company that specialize in training people that are doing high-risk jobs. So one of the fun facts I like to say is I've got a swimming pool in the building where my office is. It's quite cool. I've got 20 years plus in industry. Started out as a software developer and moved through head of technology, technical lead roles. I've got quite a lot of experience of building and scaling agile delivery teams. And from a practice point of view, I do a lot of enterprise cloud architecture, experience in public sector, but also private sector and smaller SaaS companies.
Fantastic. I love the wealth of knowledge we've got here already. Next, Ryan, go for it.
Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Townsend. I've spent a similar time in tech as Fiona, about 20 years. Dealt with a lot of startups during that time. My title on the kind of event announcement is slightly out of date. I have spent the last 8 years as a full-time CTO, but very recently I've made the move to be a fractional CTO. And my expertise kind of lies in primarily retail and e-commerce, but kind of anything web-based SaaS startups all the way up to enterprise. And similarly, again, to Fiona, I've had a lot of experience scaling agile teams as well.
Brilliant. And last but by no means least, Nick.
Hi everyone, my name is Nick Westall. I'm an interim CTO, though I've been in the industry for about 30 years and at C-level for about 12, 15 of those. Typically, I'm working in the mid-markets, technical organizations with complex regulated workloads in the background. Do a lot of work pre, during, and post mergers and acquisitions, carve-outs, turnarounds, whether it's going to be cultural, risk, technical, or operational. A lot of strategy and advisory work, but also working with organizations that have grand growth and rapid growth ambitions and helping them realize those, and quite often having to come in as a backfill to make that happen.
Fantastic. So as you can tell, everybody, we have some really amazing experience and knowledge to dip into today. So with no further ado, what we would really like to talk about today and to understand is not necessarily the specific agile process or methodology used, because that's obviously been discussed a lot recently, especially. But we're interested in the interpersonal relationships and the communication aspects of agile working. First off, I'll come to you, John. How do you move through norming and storming?
Yeah, one of the practices that we've developed, because we work with so many different new projects and new clients, is a 3-week discovery up front. And we're even trying to compress that into 2 weeks. And the focus is really on identifying what value we're trying to deliver. And we define that very unambiguously as a really important unsolved problem to a well-defined and set of end users. Usually it's more than one group of end users, and also a well-defined business objectives with specific success metrics. And we do it through a series of intense workshops, typically 3 to 4 hours every other day during that period. And I won't get into all of the process, but it's the act of working together transparently as one team, and we use a Miro board for collaboration, which is really useful for both the synchronous workshops as well as asynchronous work, because people are all around the world. We record everything and we put timestamps so we can go back and look at that. So getting on the same page with this common vision up front is really important, and something that we've had a lot of success with.
Thank you. Do any of the rest of you have anything to add to that as to how you approach the norming and storming aspects?
I can take a little bit. So I suppose, you know, as you are growing, that definition of quality is really important. As John mentioned, it's really important that you actually define what that is. It may have changed since, you know, before you started that growth. So being open to that change and kind of redefining that is very important to kind of go back and revisit, I suppose.
I can add to that as well, in that if it's going to be continuous growth and it's going to be sustained over a period of time, and to pitch into sort of Ryan and John, it's setting that expectation that nothing stays the same but change, and that we're onboarding people now, we're going to be onboarding more tomorrow, and another team, and actually we're going to get to a point where we'll hit a critical mass where the current model just doesn't work, and we're going to have to take a different approach and change again and again and again. So yeah, nothing stays the same but change. You're always going to be changing, so just embrace it.
Excellent. Embrace change. I like it. Yeah, Fiona, go for it.
I'll ask everybody said something anyway. So for me, like Agile, the actual Agile frameworks, the things that are out there, they give you a lot of tools to actually deal with these. So I think one of my most important tools is like establishing retros straight from the beginning. So that whole culture around introspection and experimentation and adaptation, adapting to things and not being afraid, you know, that's just absolutely key to being able to get through right through to the performance phase, and keeping it in there as well. I'm going to say retrospective a lot times today.
That's okay. That's okay. It's good to have a common theme to go away with. So, within this, are there any common dysfunctional patterns that you've noticed, and how do you handle that when that comes up?
Mind if I jump in on this one again? Great. So I think we've already touched on it. You know, Nick said, you know, change is constant. Things are going to change. So, you know, as people scale their businesses, assuming that things won't, you know, is a very dysfunctional pattern, and kind of burying your head in the sand, not communicating that strategy on to, you know, new members of staff as well as existing members of staff. I think it was Jason Fried from Basecamp said a couple of months ago that culture is like a rolling 50-day window. And I thought that really kind of resonated with me, because, you know, you can put up with so much. Obviously, there's a lot of companies going through a lot of turmoil right now, and, you know, employees will put up with that. And the same thing is, as you're growing, everyone understands that, okay, there's going to be a whole bunch of new people coming into the business. You know, the culture will change. But communicating with those people is really important. You don't want to lose your best members of staff who've been there from the earlier days, the ones that have built up so much domain knowledge in their heads. You know, ideally you want to try and get as much documentation out as possible, but, you know, bring them on the journey with you. You know, really clearly communicate to them, you know, where things are heading. You know, some people might have built up that, you know, they were expecting to be promoted into such and such role, and they would just be a shoo-in for that as the company grows. You know, you don't want to just abandon that, you know, if they were hoping for that. So, you know, communicating with them and really understanding what they're hoping to get out of it, you know, understanding what elements of your culture you want to keep and what things you might want to change. You know, as we said before, you know, the definition of like what your quality is might change. You know, you might have gone from an approach of move fast and break things to, hang on, we actually have commercial contracts now that we're liable for, and you can no longer follow that approach. We know we need to take a much more rigorous approach. And then, that all kind of feeds into kind of how you hire as well. I think, I've always hired for cultural fit first rather than purely, technical ability. Because I think that that's something that you can overcome over time. You're going to have to onboard people anyway. They're going to have to learn your domain knowledge, to be kind of productive members of staff anyway. So if there's a little hiccup here and there where they're having to learn a bit, that's fine. But it's a lot harder to kind of integrate someone who's just not a good cultural fit, and that can really derail the growth of a company. So just a few tips in there.
I know, Fiona, you've got a bit of a story around this kind of area of the topic, haven't you?
I have to be careful how I divulge the story. So there are two kind of anti-patterns that I see being the most damaging in teams. One is like the lack of trust. So, the Git guardian, there's only this person can merge into master, only the tech lead can release the deployment into production. That whole control and lack of trust, it's a huge factor in teams actually not being able to move even out of the storming phase into forming, which is like you can't get out the first phase until you're all trusting each other. And I think the other one, which is kind of attached to it, is around and I think it's because a lot of it, I am an introvert, and I'm actually quite averse to conflict, and I've had to teach myself to go in and have healthy conflict. And so that lack of challenge within a team, so you end up with the one person taking over, and so you end up with loads of different problems around you only have that one person's view of what it should be, so you have an inferior product, an inferior idea, but also the knock-on effect to the rest of the team. So that whole lack of self-worth and imposter syndrome that everybody that we all get, just it's amplified by this person who's in control and letting you feel like you're not good enough to be part of it. So how do you get around them? How do you get around those things? Has anybody had any good experiences of basically slaying the Git controller, apart from just taking away their keys? That's one of the things that I do as well, but also passing around the Scrum Master role is seen as a bit of a leadership type of role, in getting people to take that on themselves helps with that. In retrospectives, how to induce healthy conflict retrospectives, most definitely.
I think that, elaborating on the retro side of things, it's really important that your leadership actually buy into that. It's all very well, a lot of people are like, oh, we want to go faster, let's bring in some agile coaches and then that'll magically make things better, or we'll do Scrum or whatever it might be. But the whole point of those processes are to raise up these impediments, and if you're just going to ignore them as a leader and not actually action any of them because you've bought some stand-up desks for their meeting room and that's about all you can commit to, then again, you've kind of lost that trust from your employees. They're going to stop raising things because they're like, well, if I can never get budget for doing this, or they can never set time aside to do that, then ultimately it's like, what's the point in really doing this? And I think you mentioned in terms of control over releases and things like that. For me, I've always tried to build teams that are as kind of multifunctional as possible. We in enterprise, and they always talk about shifting left, but also it's kind of almost opening the right hand side as well, which is I want the team to control as much as possible and be responsible for that, build that trust in them to deliver on that. And as you scale up, that's a really important point as well, is that you shouldn't create the kind of silos of okay, well, we've got this QA team over here, we've got this DevOps team over here, we've got these developers over here, and everyone's kind of just slinging things over the fence to one another. No one's taking that kind of ownership and responsibility. So I say building those kind of cross-functional teams that can deliver as far as possible from early requirements through to something being live and getting feedback from customers. Again, builds trust with them. They're going to see the value in their jobs. They get to actually take something all the way through those stages, feel like their input's valued, and then ultimately, out of those retrospectives, is going to come really valuable stuff because they've got such a wide view of what's happening in that pipeline, rather than just this bit affects me, and then suddenly, you're saying, okay, we can't do that because that affects another team over there. They're in kind of control of their own destiny. So I think that can really help to build trust within the teams.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. So I've been the Agile coach that's gone in places. And the first thing that I do is manage up. So talk to the board, the exec about Agile, and then disband all of the little empires.
Yeah. And there's some great questions in the chat that I'd love to get some chatter going from the audience, because we have a lot of knowledge here. The first one's really interesting in terms of, in your experience, what is the critical point where scaling gets hard versus expected quality? I almost feel like this would be a good wisdom of the crowd to get some thoughts. But I'd noticed that it's sort of it has to do with the number of communication points, so the size of the team and communication, as well as the processes. So I think of going from one team to two teams, and then, because that's a very different dynamic, and then going from two teams to three teams, because then you need to add something, and then it's sort of from 3 to 8 or 10. It's similar sort of pains and processes in place, and then beyond 10, then it starts there's additional order of magnitude has changed. So we can get into some of the practices on how to do that, but I'd love to hear what other people think in terms of the breakpoints that you guys have experienced, because I haven't done research on this myself, but I'd be curious to see what people think, and then maybe we can go back and talk about some critical things that need to be done both on the process side and on the communication side.
I think I can add a little bit to this. I'm going to pull out that kind of standard IT response card of it depends. But I think it really depends on the kind of culture and structure that you have. So as you just mentioned, John, the number of communication points grows exponentially depending on how big the team you have that you're communicating within. So like I said, if you have these kind of cross-functional teams that can, develop their own product or their own feature set, and it's kind of isolated away enough that they can move forwards, then you can get fairly large by doing that. It gets harder when you've got someone above that who, like a kind of product manager of product managers, who then needs to kind of create that consistency, because as well, they need to kind of keep that communication point to kind of a minimum, really. So keeping people aligned along that journey becomes harder and harder. But typically I'd keep a team to between 4 and maybe 8 people at most. Again, beyond that, that's when communication starts to break down. And then obviously above that, having 4 to 8 teams is quite comfortable for them one person to kind of oversee. But if you start to kind of break that, or if you have a culture of that person thinks that they are the boss, the way I've always seen it is that anyone in a managerial or leadership position effectively works for the teams underneath them. They're people there to go and let those people do their jobs and help them do it, not just to be a kind of go-between who then shuns any ideas, etc. So if you've got the right culture, you can go a lot further before you're going to hit any breaking points. Similarly with your organization hierarchy and all that kind of stuff. So it really does depend. But I think that communication points, number of people that you're having to communicate with on a daily basis does have a massive impact on that. And smaller teams generally do go faster.
Maybe add to that as well, and that I would fully agree with Ryan in 4 to 8 people per team, and even numbers always seem to work that much better. I don't know why, But I think to take on that, one of the points there, that the leadership, servant leadership, definitely you're there to serve the team. Part of that is to make sure that proactively that the communication is going on outside of the hard technical stuff that they're doing as well. There's got to be some level of socialization and understanding, because they won't build those relationships across the teams, particularly if those teams are distributed or working remote or working from different countries and quite possibly languages in some cases as well. Finding ways to actually drive that, and again, it can depend on the culture of the organization and how well it's distributed as to how frequently you can physically get people together, or you can have just relaxed time so that they can actually do that.
We have had a follow-up question as well, which I think you've actually just touched on the answer to, Nick, but it was directed to Fiona. So how do you handle the responsibility and ownership in the context of avoiding assigning control to specific people? They really like the concept that all could merge and deploy, etc., but just wonder if it's not getting rid of one problem in favour of another one.
So I can think of maybe a technical reason. It's not really though. So your testing, your continuous integration, your pipelines should be good enough to catch that. It should be good enough to pick up when there is something that shouldn't have been in there. We're experimenting at the moment in my organization with removing pull requests. So we don't raise pull requests anymore. It's interesting, and it hasn't been as catastrophic as you'd think. We've gone a lot quicker. There's a lot more ownership, and everybody, apart from myself, probably for very good reasons, has the ability to push code into our production environments. So yeah.
I've got a question for you, Fiona. Do your teams do a lot of kind of pair programming and things like that? So when it gets to the point of needing a pull request, it's kind of
irrelevant. Irrelevant, yeah. You go straight into master. Trunk-based development. I was just answering a question.
I have a good anecdote from a friend of mine who used to work at the BBC, and they basically measured their confidence by would they release this on a Friday, and they were so confident in their pipeline that literally I probably shouldn't be saying this, but one day on a Friday night in the pub, they released some code to production, just to prove that, they're so confident in their alerting, kind of risk management around, all the testing and everything that goes into that. The process of rolling back if they need to, they can just, literally press a button and it's back to the previous version. So, that's a very good way, I think, to think about, how much can you trust that pipeline? And yeah, you may not want to, at least not make a habit of deploying on Fridays. However, there are times when that becomes a necessity, and the more confidence you have in that pipeline, the more kind of fast moving you can be, I guess. If you're having to respond to an incident or whatever, obviously you're reducing the time to fixing that and getting that out into production by having that pipeline that you can actually depend on.
I've actually lived that dream, well, been part of it. So part of creating that dream, I was very privileged to be part of HMRC's digital delivery platform many years ago as it was starting up. And I think by the time that I left, there was 40 plus delivery teams across about 6 sites in the UK, all delivering continuously on a Friday afternoon, sometimes in the pub, that wasn't my teams, into production without fear. It is possible. UK government's managed it. It's definitely possible, and it was brilliant to be a part of. And I've took all of that I've learned from there, and things like the government digital service standards, so about user research and user-centered design, and I've took that everywhere that I've gone. I've took that into some of the crustiest investment banks in Canary Wharf with me, and it's amazing.
That does sound phenomenal. I'm well excited to hear about that.
It really was. You
Amazing.
imagine 40 teams. So each team had about 6 people in. So we were a bit bloated, but we did have DevOps, research, content designers, product owners, testers, multiple testers and developers, all in the same team, all empowered to understand their problem from the public's point of view, develop a solution, test that solution and put it out there. So they owned the full end-to-end journey, 40 delivery teams. And it was amazing.
Wow. Brilliant.
And Fiona,
Still going.
how did you know if what was successful and or not?
What do you mean? Like,
In terms of, did you meet the business goals?
yeah, you kind of have to because it was legislative. So did we meet the business goals? Do you know what? We probably did, but the business didn't know how to measure its goals. So that was an interesting journey, but I'd left before they got to the end of that.
Yeah, that's something that we're in the process of putting in place. There's a lot of great tools. I really like Endo is good, and I'm totally drawing a blank. Heap Analytics
Yes.
is one that is really great. But also I always go back to just having a good mechanism to get good old human feedback. Just talking to key users, or just if it's B2C with Matt's, just getting that word so that there's some it makes it more real than just numbers to complement that. And what I always try to do is from the very beginning, create a straight line for that sort of feedback and information to the engineering team. Not just definitely the principal engineers on each team and overall, but even there's always really good engineers across the different levels and junior ones. And I always look for the folks that are really genuinely interested in what users want and find ways to get those folks focused on or direct links to customers.
Yeah, I mean, I've been known to have engineers out in the high street in Newcastle, doing research, asking users. It sounded crazy at the time, but we ended up creating rainbows and pixie dust because of it.
That is brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's fantastic. We have got another question in the chat, which I'd like to put to you. Andrew says he's been asked to create a hiring plan for next year for budgeting purposes, but also the business plan for investment. Our roadmap is currently incredibly flexible depending on the client needs. We have few but very large clients. Do you have any advice for developing a reasonable hiring plan for a startup engineering team?
And maybe jump in to start with, and I think the others will probably be able to answer the rest far better than me. I think, and it pitches into one of the other questions in there, is understanding what is the vision and how do you communicate that with the rest of the team, or indeed with your customers and your management team and the senior leadership and those that hold the purse strings, if it's the CFO or whoever it happens to be. And so it's understanding what is that vision and then your mission to fulfill that vision for this year. And whatever you choose will be wrong, particularly if it's in a particularly dynamic one. And it's just having the confidence to say, well, actually, if there's a 70% chance it's going to look like this, or an 80%, or it could just be 60%. You've got to draw a line in the sand, and it should be based off gut feel, but also the feedback that you get from all of the other stakeholders, from your own team in terms of what's possible, the product owners, the end customers that are out there, whether you're out on the street interviewing people that are going by in Newcastle or wherever it happens to be. You've got to be able to build that vision and then put a mission behind it so that you can actually articulate it properly. and then just start, because whatever you do will be wrong. And it's setting the expectation back into the senior leadership team, the managers, and into your own team that this is just a starting point. And all true agile processes, it's going to change as we move along, but it will change in a reflective fashion that's going to support what we need to achieve.
Yeah, that's great. And I always like to start in any sort of project with a deep understanding, and the successful projects have really deep understanding of the end user and the problem you're trying to solve. And the best way to get at that is methodologies that originally were defined very well by Tony Ulwick, and what customer wants. And he wrote some good papers, and then started doing some work with Clayton Christensen, the innovator solution. And I've developed a very guerrilla approach. So rather than 6 months, sort of compress it down to a couple weeks to really I pinpoint where the biggest unsolved pain points are. And to answer the question, hopefully you've gone through that exercise. And to the extent that your two big customers are representative of the market overall, then you can create that shared vision and pinpoint these problems and saying, this is the problem we want to solve. These are the success metrics. And when the big client asks for something that's often left field, you can say, well, we can do that, but this is what we're going to be missing. And this is the problem that we want to have. So really getting buy-off into, these are the big problems, these are the metrics, and measuring success along the way.
Excellent, thank you. So I hope that's been helpful. Again, we've got so many questions in the chat. So how does an organization assess the impact of changes on the overall system?
It's an easy one. It's not actually. So two things really. For me, it would be DORA metrics. So understanding how your DevOps and your release processes are, how healthy they are, and how well you understood what you were supposed to be building in the first place. And I guess the other side of it is NPS. So is your customers getting increasingly joyful using your products and services? So, and they're quite easy to measure. And nobody ever argues with a good NPS.
Yeah, I can imagine that's one of the bonuses, isn't it? It's like, well, our customers are happy. That means we're doing well. Like you say, it's the easiest metric really to go with, isn't it? Okay, so on a slightly different tack, I'm literally going with the questions as they've appeared to me. So how can we provide opportunities for continuous learning and professional development for testers?
Well, I think this cuts across whether it's either testers or whoever it happens to be. Leadership need to build in continuous personal development plans. And whether it's going to be hard technical skills, whether it's going to be soft skills, whether it's going to be leadership skills for those that have that ambition, you have to build time in, and you have to build the resources and the support in to actually allow those people during working time. More often than not, they'll go off and they'll do extra anyway in their own time, but during working time, so that they can actually go and do that. And it's not going to be to the detriment of however you're measuring the delivery level of your process. Because if you aren't training today for tomorrow, then there won't be a tomorrow, or it'll be a very messy, painful tomorrow when you get there.
Couldn't have said it better.
Excellent, thank you.
I was just going to add that I think setting an expectation of how much time should be spent on this from above is really important. Just saying, yeah, we're happy for people to do it doesn't really give anyone, it's kind of like the whole unlimited paid time off thing, where it ends up being people kind of under indexing on how much they should really be having in terms of time off. And then obviously you get burnout and things like that. Same thing happens with this, where people say, businesses say, oh, we're happy to support that. It aligns with where, we want to be ready for the future as well. But then they don't, they push people to the limit, try and get the most out of them productivity wise. and don't actually kind of factor that in, into their actual working hours. So I think that's really important. And then also on the other side is setting a budget as well. We always set a yearly budget on, for things like conferences and ebooks and whatever they need. And that way it's kind of like, look, it's already set aside. It's already, you don't have to go and ask for approval. This is the amount that you can just spend without having to come and bother me. If you want to go beyond that and you've got a very good reason for doing that, then your team lead, can come and discuss that with me, or you can come and discuss it with me directly, and we can have that conversation. But, kind of, I say, setting an actual expectation is really important. And, you can try and, work that into kind of a bit of a calendar as well. What you don't want to do is, if you're doing say Scrum, velocity is kind of going like this, because every now and again you're like, the team's like, we need to do some training, and then suddenly they just take a week off. You need to kind of balance it out. Having someone kind of monitor that. You could even maybe use a kind of holiday calendar kind of system. We've used one in the past where we would, start hounding people when it gets to like August and they haven't taken their days off, because we don't want everyone just taking the entirety of December off to use up their holiday days. So having somewhere where you can actually monitor this, like, are people actually kind of taking, are people, actually using that time? Not obviously to go and hound anyone, but a team lead could monitor that on behalf of their team and make sure that they're all getting that. So.
Helps if I unmute when I'm trying to talk, doesn't it? So sorry. So what I'm hearing from you there then obviously is it's about communication, it's about setting expectations, obviously, like Nick said as well, enabling people to know that they can do training and this is where to find it, and actually it's important that you keep up to date with everything that's happening. And yeah, brilliant. So I'm just having a little moment. Sorry, John, do we need to wrap up, or do we still have some time available?
That's what I was just looking at. What was the
so we've got until 3, I think, but I didn't want to take on your guys' time if you had it set as finishing now and you need to go.
So I think, why don't we do this? Why don't we, this is a good stopping point for folks that captured what I think there is an opportunity. I really like the next question from Usman. How do we overcome resistance to change and foster a culture of continuous improvement and experimentation? So I'm always a big fan of, hey, let the audience make the decision. So for those of you who want to stay for that question, please do. Otherwise, it's really been a pleasure. Hopefully you've gotten a lot out of today. Great. It's always fun working with folks like Nick and Fiona and Ryan, with Abby, your moderation skills to keep us all moving forward. So why don't we bifurcate at this point? And I'll jump into this question because it's something that's important to me personally, because resistance to change is normal, particularly as a project grows. And one of the most important things is to have a real sense of ownership, and that's challenging when you start getting 10, 15, 20 teams across that. And because with if people have ownership, and the second part of that is a culture where it's okay to fail, and a common vision, I keep getting back to that, but it's just something that's so important. So I would say those are the three ingredients that I really look for in our teams to foster this continuous improvement and experimentation. Because if I don't feel empowered, then continuous improvement and experimentations help. If I'm afraid of failure, it's not going to happen. And if there's not a common vision, then you could have experimentation, but it could be going, you could be having 20 different experiments going in 20 different directions. I'd love to hear what other folks think.
I think if there's continuous growth and continuous change going on, I think there's a bit to the end of the storming, forming and norming bit, which is the mourning. Yeah, so people mourning the fact that they had a fantastic team that was absolutely flying and doing really, really well. And then getting to a point where they've been dropped into a new circumstance, quite possibly with another team. They're going through the storming phase again to jostle in and figure out what it all is. But actually they're missing what happened before. And it's actually making time and space to allow that to happen and not driving change too fast, to allow people to actually stay engaged with the process and to deal with what's already happened as well as what's going to happen in the future. So yeah, time, space and support, I think.
Yeah, I'd like to elaborate on just a little bit of what Nick said there in terms of, not changing things kind of too quickly. I think there's a kind of concern that, when people start to kind of scale very quickly, they need to change everything, reevaluate everything immediately, and, act like they're a big boy now and play like, the big players do, etc. And, it'll be, whole technology changes. We need to do this new software development lifecycle. We need to, bring in these experts, etc. And, it's very easy to get kind of caught up and get ahead of yourself rather than thinking, let's communicate where we want to go, bring these people along with us, really communicate that, we want them on board. We want to hear their feedback. People just want to feel valued at the end of the day, and feel like their work is meaningful. So as long as they know that it kind of aligns with where we're going and that, they are part of that team moving forwards, and that their feedback is valuable, then, I find that people are generally quite happy to that. They look forward to what the potential is in the future. And, you have to be careful not to overpromise, but obviously you can communicate that as well in terms of, going back to like the professional development side of things. You can say, look, we're going to be growing to an organization of this scale. That means we're going to be opening up these kinds of roles. You'll be sat on stage one day saying how you started here and you ended up over here, all the things you learned along the way, and that's going to open, your career opportunities going forwards as well, even if you do decide to leave. So yeah, just overly communicate, if anything. Make sure everyone's kind of aware of where you're heading, and let that change happen a little bit more naturally. Expect things to break. Your culture, your organization, everything's changing at the same time. So, accept that things will go wrong, and that's fine. And you learn the breaking points, and you put solutions in place as and when. Don't try and predict too much of the future, and try to do all of that work up front. That's something that, I've had to personally deal with in my previous business, where we almost grew too quickly. We got a massive client on board and we had to go basically from zero to, masses of scale overnight. And that meant that I missed out on a whole bunch of learning between those 2 points, and retrospectively learned about all of those things over the following years. And the business was completely different, 3 years after that point, to what I'd expect it would have been. So just let it happen a little more organically, I would say.
It's always going to take longer than you think. It's going to be harder than you think, and there will always be bumps in the road. It's like it never goes from A to B. There's a big whopping squiggle in the middle.
Excellent, thank you so much. So as John and I were discussing, that is about all we've got time for today, but thank you so much to everybody who's joined us on or on LinkedIn. I hope you found this session really useful. Thank you so much to John, Nick, Ryan and Fiona for joining us and giving us the benefit of your knowledge and expertise. It's been brilliant to hear from you, and some really fascinating stories and excellent points you've made today. So thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed hosting you all. So yeah, thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care. Have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, Avi.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for
Thank
attending.
you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.